Stephanie, good morning. For all of our millions of faithful viewers, I am sorry for running 8 minutes late. I really have no excuse. I was working out though. How does my arms look okay? Yeah, look pretty. No.
You should do lunges. That would be a big step forward for you. It's getting worse. I think it's getting worse every episode.
No, but I set you up with a softball. That wasn't even planned. Well done. This is going to be slow, dramatic dad joke golf clap. I mean, are they still a dad joke when they come from you, Stephanie?
Well, I'm glad that you mentioned golf because a lot of dads carry extra socks in case they get a hole in one. Okay, we're going to stop now.
I don't know. It might just be, we might just do this whole episode. Maybe Francie can come on and just do dad jokes. Just the two of you. I'll just sit back and laugh at your dad jokes.
I'm sure she has something more valuable to contribute.
Probably more valuable than our completely sophomoric and terrible jokes. Stephanie, how much revenue are you hemorrhaging because your best people are walking out the door? Companies with engaged employees see 23% higher profitability, yet 85% of employees worldwide are disengaged with their work. Kind of like, we're disengaged with this podcast. No, that's right. Meaning most businesses are operating with one hand tied behind their back. Here's something that'll blow your mind. Howard Schultz, the founder of Starbucks, once said, "We aren't in the business of aren't in the coffee business serving people. We're in the people business serving coffee." Sounds nice, right? Here's the kicker. Schultz later admitted the Starbucks' rapid expansion in the 2000s made them lose sight of this principle, leading to plummeting employee satisfaction and stock price that dropped 75%. Took a complete cultural overhaul to save the company. Today, Stephanie, on How to Founder, we're talking about retaining high caliber talent. I am Chris Franks. With me standing in for Anthony Franco is Stephanie Hayes, and we are joined today by the very patient, very patient Francie Jain. Francie, welcome. Francie Jain is the scrappy founder of Terawatt, a B2B marketplace that's flipping the script on employee retention. She's figured out the real problem isn't finding good people, it's keeping them from mentally checking out long before they physically leave. Francie, I've started companies. Isn't it just about put in a ping pong table and get some snacks? That's how you retain your top talent, isn't it?
Well, it's interesting. It's interesting because I think you get, the initial good reaction of a ping pong table or a keg or, I don't know, soda. All the free perks are great initially, but ultimately all the data says that professional development is one of the top reasons people stay at organizations.
And I'll say, Stephanie, that when we had a ping pong table, I am stupidly, ridiculously competitive. And it probably led to some employee dissatisfaction because, me throwing my ping pong racket against the wall and being pissed when my employees beat me. So probably not the best idea. Yeah. Stephanie, what's the best or worst employee, perk hack that you've seen?
Well, I grew up in the .com days, right? So where everybody was paid in stock options. And you saw every manner of the ping pong table or the vending machine. But if I was going to really say, the biggest offense I ever saw was actually in a big, large public sector organization where they continued to focus on benefits and nice office and workout gym, whereas all of the employees were they just lost people constantly, especially good, innovative people, because what people really wanted was ownership over their work and meaning behind their work. And as long as they would continue with the union mentality and the focus on, material objects, They just couldn't retain smart, innovative people.
Well, Francie, I think that's the first probably misconception. I was going to ask what the biggest misconception is, but that's probably it, right? Is that if I just do some cool stuff, that people will stay.
I think like what I always think the biggest misconception is that there isn't a cost for this. You know, high attrition, right? When you have high employee turnover, there's a significant cost for that because that's revenue that could be cash that you could, use later on. And so the big thing that always is the aha moment for people is you say like, listen, okay, well, you really have to get a handle on what your individual, company employee turnover is, and then how that relates to the average in the industry. And what would happen if you became above average? What if you had 4% employee turnover instead of 20% employee turnover? And there's a real cost to that. So it's like direct costs and indirect costs. And I think a lot of times people think, well, there's really not that much we can do. This is basically what it is in our industry. And that's actually really not the case. I mean, there always are above average organizations that have better culture. And like you said, Stephanie, like 100%. I mean, people want to identify with like the why of the organization, but they also want to feel like they're growing. And so whether that's professional development or being given really cool projects or being able to come up with interesting ideas, I mean, that is how you retain people. I mean, the whole sort of top down, I'm the boss, I tell you how high to jump, that kind of thing, that it's just doesn't create a great culture.
I think you also just want to talk about a few more myths that I hear kind of constantly. And another one is that old people like me, not me personally, because I was a terrible employee, but when old people like me would stay with companies for a really long time and they were very loyal to companies. And now people just aren't loyal. They just are changing. It's all about them and they're all very egocentric. Is there any truth to that? Or is that just sort of another one of those narratives that we've been sort of propagating?
So that's a great question. I kind of wonder if this whole loyalty thing was more of a throwback to like maybe union days where you got like an annual increase every year. I need to that's a great question because I would love to research that and really understand like what is that about. Definitely Gen Z is more likely to jump ship because they figured out that you can get a promotion and a raise if you leave your job. And that only works though in a good economy, right? So at some point you have to kind of stay where you are. So I think there's like a little bit more ability for the younger generation to move. But I also think because there's such a large generation that you can't ignore what they're looking for, sorry, yeah.
No, carry on.
Oh yeah, no, I think it's just really interesting. So like one of the things they expect, Gen Z especially expects employers to present or give them professional development. And also on top of that, they don't really have the money to because their student debt is really high as a generation. So they're looking to learn on the job, not paying additionally on their own dime for learning.
So let me float this, devil's advocate sort of opinion, and I'd love to hear kind of what you think about it. I was speaking to a CEO about this of a services organization. And, his take on it was, I'm not in favor of retaining employees. I'd rather make them fired up to be here. Retaining makes it feel like you're trapping them. I'm happy to pay someone to leave if they feel that there's a better option out there for them.
Okay, so I'd be really curious to know what that organization's retention is. It sounds a little bit like survival of the fittest.
For context, they're an organization that has won the best place to work many, many years in a row.
Oh, great. Wonderful. Okay, good. So they're doing other things. So it's not, because when I first hear that, it makes me feel like, well, I'm not going to be, what's the word? I'm not going to be vulnerable first. I want you to be vulnerable and you to tell me you want to be here before I help you. It's just like this sort of like gamesmanship of like, who's going to like be kinder to the other one. I think that definitely 100% people want to be in a place, and that's what makes them stay, is that they are being given, autonomy or the ability to like determine their career. And there's probably a lot of really interesting things going on at that organization if they're winning these awards, which by the way, you don't win those awards if you have high turnover. So
no, for
something really good is happening. Yeah. And that's interesting. I mean, it's a different way of looking at it. Like, I'd be curious to know, like, what do they do? Like, what are they offering the let's say the lowest entry level people? Like, are there certain kinds of benefits, or there something different that they're offering them than their competitors? Or is it that it's a pretty entrepreneurial environment where if you have an idea, you can run with it? Like, who doesn't love that? Like, that is an incredible place to work. So so that's another example of like the engagement and like finding ways to engage employees and get them really excited. I think it's a place everyone wants to work. But I think my whole point generally is just that, like, turnover and retention are costs to the business. And a lot of times people think about that as an individual situation. Like, they're like, oh, that person quit. Okay, well, that must have been, they had different reasons for quitting. But if you look at it over the year, and then you compare year to year, and then you compare yourself to like your competitors in the industry, you'll see that there's a trend, right? There's probably an annual turnover rate at your organization, and it can always be made better unless you're at 5% or lower. Like, that's pretty much like no turnover. But some of these industries are crazy high, and it's shocking, and that's like money out the door. So that's why I like to talk about it.
Pulling that thread just a little bit more, I also think that there's another sort of layer to that in terms of, there's going to be churn in some areas, and how are we clear on who we want to retain and who we are okay letting go, right?
Get out of my head, Stephanie. That was my next question. Like, what about good turnover? And we hear about this thing called good turnover.
You just sit there and look pretty, and
that's what I'm just a pretty face
in your head.
Exactly, right.
Well, so I think that really the in my opinion, like, the secret sauce is basically helping everyone become great, and then knowing that you will lose people along the way who you want, but that you will have an alumni base. So you can't control what people do with when you grow them, right? Someone might get a great offer, they might move around the world. You've no idea of knowing where it will take anyone, and certainly not the whole company is not going to become the CEO, right? But the idea is the more that you can create who you have to be like A players, and the A players you would hire, like the grass is greener hire that you're always looking for, like, make those your employees. And so then you can choose like who to promote, and maybe someone's not getting promoted as much, but you're still developing them, and if they leave. But I think, so I like to turn, like, that question I like to turn on my head, which is like, make it so people don't want to go. It's that I always never get that quote right, but there's this great the founder of Virgin has this great quote about, make it so that the organization's so good that no one ever wants to leave. And I think that, like, but I don't mean by like ping pong tables. I mean that letting them, have autonomy, not 100% autonomy, but letting them come up with ways to make the company go further, and have everyone join in like a true north and have a goal. And I think the more that you can find ways to engage employees, like, then you have the choice as the employer, right? I mean, if someone's not working, certainly, like, either the question is, why are they not working? Can you help them become a better worker? Or maybe you do need to fire them. But I do think, in my like heart of hearts, I do believe like everyone kind of wants to be great, but they just maybe don't know how. And so maybe they need more support or something like that.
There's two examples of the themes that you talked about, Stephanie, from your and my generation of being in startups. The first one is Tony Hsieh. I think he wrote Happiness Inc. Zappos. And he did that exact same thing, which is he'd walk around and pay people to leave, but it wasn't for any other reason other than the fact that he was so obsessed with having a great culture that he wanted to make sure that everybody genuinely wanted to be there. And so it was a really unique thing at the time. And the second one is the very famous Netflix culture deck, which was written, I can't remember her name. She's just a remarkable people leader. And it talked about this idea that it's very unlikely that you're going to end your career in Netflix. However, if we do our job correctly, when you're here at Netflix, you're going to leave better. And that's okay. We can't judge if you find a better option. And she famously said, go test the market, please. If you can make more money, go do that. So some interesting themes from our kind of version of startups. But Francie, I want to sort of change gears and say, okay, I think I get it. It's not about the perks. It's about people and about how we treat them. But tactically, let's just start helping us think through this. And even as we start in selection and hiring, how are we thinking about this concept of getting the right people in the door and making sure they stay? And what are the qualities and attributes that we need to be thinking about, even as we're just starting to hire people?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, actually, I think about that Netflix deck all the time because there's this one comment in there about they want to hire for the people that pick up the trash on the floor when no one's looking. And for me, that kind of means like hiring on mindset, like hiring on a can-do attitude. I think if you have someone who's really interested in learning, who like these founders have said, they really want to be there and they'll do whatever it takes to like become better and become more, to give more to the organization. So I think hiring on attitude for sure. And I think, when I talk about professional development, it's a really broad term, but I think it really, to me, it means like really anything, just becoming better at your job, better at life. And so it could be, one of my ideas is I think it'd be really cool if every organization allowed every employee to have a certain percentage of their salary devoted to their chosen professional development. So like one person might say, I just wish I were a better negotiator. And like that will definitely benefit the company, right? It's not like you give someone a bonus and they go buy a couch for their house. Like, when you have a skill that's usable on all of life, it will benefit the company and it will benefit them at home as well. And so I always just think about it as like the ownership and the choosing of like your path as an employee and sort of becoming better. I don't know. What are your thoughts on
That's
that?
perfect. Stephanie, I want to ask you a question because this is one of the things that's kind of a thing we don't talk about very much, which is we hire on culture, we hire on core values. But I've been part of companies that have hired everybody that was like, hey, we're super aggressive, we're super growth, but like we just are go, go, go. And it was a terrible place to work. Just because everybody was so aggro and so just, driven, things like that. Stephanie, examples about that. I mean, how do you think about it when you're thinking about building companies? Do you think about different bricks, different makeups, different stones to build a wall, or is it just trying to get as many people that fit a particular concept?
Yeah, this is right in my crosshairs right now as we're just starting up a new venture that is focused entirely on building teams in high growth organizations and all about, human led development. And I think, one of the areas that I've become really conscious of just, through some relationships I have right now is that we talk about culture and we don't really talk about what culture means. And a lot of people think culture is, the Friday nights at the ping pong table, but culture is intrinsically tied to purpose, right? And purpose is such an important piece of why everyone is there. And so, yes, we have lots of logistical problems when we have super high growth. And in fact, the conversation we had just yesterday with John was all about scaling in a smart way so that we are, not running into some of those problems. But when you do have high growth, you get all of these knowledge retention issues and we have like people moving around really, really quickly. And so how do we address those and develop a culture that ties everyone back to purpose? And I don't know what you think about that, Francie, and because it's those kinds of things that are keeping people around these days. It's not
Oh,
necessarily, the work itself.
yeah. Well, I think the question always, like, as you were speaking, I was thinking a little bit about Nike. Like, I bet most of the people that work there are just really inspired by like the human body and like the physical feats that people can do in sports, right? Like, what is the North Star for each organization? And when you have that also, and everyone's really clear on what it is, it's so much easier to make decisions. It's also easier to be a junior employee because you kind of know what you're solving for. I think that like coming up with like a really good North Star, like why we're doing this for everything gets everyone excited and it's a reason to do it. And I love that. I mean, I think that's really, and the opposite of that, right, is burnout. That's why it's important because burnout is no longer having the connection that you used to have with the organization, like period, but also it's the reason you join for some reason is not connecting, or maybe what you want to be doing, your values for your North Star, how you see the organization, it's like conflicting with what's actually happening at the organization level.
I want to ask you a question because this is something that particularly early stage founders we get into. So we bring in employees and we say, our job is to help you grow. And that's the culture we want to promote. We want to make sure that somebody comes in. We want to make sure that they're awesome. And if they need to move out of the organization to take that next step, so be it. But then the reality of the work hits. And if that person moves to a different position, even within the same company, it is pain on you as the founder because you're going to have to dive in there and do that work. It's that is a very real thing. It was a very real thing for me. And it was really a huge test of my values is to say, do I really believe that I should promote people when they're ready? Because I don't want to work 90 hours a week. I'd like to go to bed sometime. Is that something you've
Yeah.
experienced?
No. I'm like never encouraging.
All right, well, that's pretty much
I'll
me.
tell you, as a founder, the thing with the founder is I do all the shit work, right? I mean, so
Yeah.
that's the one thing as a founder is that, like, you know, you find people who are really experts at doing different things, and everything that gets left over where you can't figure out someone to do, then you do that. And I see my little business as like, you know, like a child. You know, like my joke is I think it's like in third grade and it can like get to the bus on its own and like eat and do a few things, but like, you know, I'm constantly trying to like grow this thing. And so it's like on its own. And that's my whole like focus in life is like, how do I set it up so it's running on its own. It's no longer, I'm not pushing it or I'm not keeping it alive. And so, like, when I hear that thing, I think, oh, well, is there a way to automate? Is there a way to get like an Upwork employee? You know what I mean? We can spend hours on this if you like. But I just think, yeah, I mean, the promotion thing, that's a great point. Like, if you don't have somebody who can take over that person's role if they get promoted, that's certainly an issue. But then the question I would say is, then that could be a new process of how are then you setting it up so that the star employee who's getting promoted is also helping the people below grow. You know what I mean? So that the institutional knowledge is like really deep so that as you promote people, there are like 2 or 3 people below. I mean, depending on how big the startups are, but ideally there are other people that understand what that person is doing and can like go in or at least like split that job with somebody else or something like that.
I mean, Stephanie, this is your wheelhouse. I mean, but
Yeah.
I think she brings a great point, which is don't like, even when you have 5 people, start developing people for the next role. Is that a fair thing, Stephanie?
Yeah, I would say that the founder that we talked about who has that opinion on retention, which I happen to agree with, you know, you watch him and his organization after 30 years leading this group, and they happen to do a lot of work on culture and purpose-led culture, so that's kind of in their DNA. But you know, his role in the organization, he's always said, is like, the more I'm not doing stuff and I'm evangelizing for our organization, the better job I've done. And there's so much empowerment in that organization around people owning and taking more and more ownership. So that is, I find, a very, very challenging position for founders to get into because it's so confronting for them. They've built up this value within themselves of doing the work, right? And when they have to step out of that, they start to lose their identity. And it's very seldom that founders actually go lightly into that role of letting everyone else be the experts, right?
It's
But like we
so
talked about
hard.
inverse
It's so
hierarchy,
hard.
right?
Yeah. It's so difficult to do that. And it's so difficult. And it's some of the reasons why founders fail in being leaders is because, you know, they default to that mode of productivity. All right. So Francie, in retaining our best employees, we've talked about sort of some of the myths. We've talked about some core concepts, but let's get into the weeds here. What do I need to do as a founder? I've got these rock stars. They're amazing. We talked a little bit about culture, talked a little bit about setting up a sort of a professional development system almost to make sure that these folks are growing along the way. What else can you give us? What other information can we do to help us retain our best employees?
Yeah, you know, I wish I had it at my fingertips, but there is actually a statistic that these high potential hires leave early because they're not developed. because the assumption is, oh, I'm just hiring these stars. They're going to come in. They're going to revolutionize our organization. But everyone needs this development. Everyone wants this kind of development to grow. I'll tell you, there's this one case study that one of our coaches has, and I think about it all the time, and I find it just to be really illustrative because it gives like numbers to this. So if this is interesting to you guys, because I think sometimes when we talk about this stuff, people say, oh, it sounds so woo woo, how can you quantify culture, and how can you how do you know? And I actually remember as a young employee thinking that culture was like a made up word. I was like, I didn't really think that people actually had like a culture or like solve for a culture. I just was like, oh, that's one of these like buzzwords that people have. But now, like, I've worked around a bunch of places, and like, yeah, every place has a different culture. You want to have a good culture. But so this, one of our coaches has a system called opposite strengths, and he brought it to a hospital system. It had 4,500 employees. And at the time, and it was in a smallish town in Colorado, and their employee turnover was 24%. And the average hospitals is 20%. And part of that, just as an aside, is I think that's because it's a really hierarchical system, but we don't have to get into that. But so they were like worried because they're in the smallish town, they just can't be replacing people at a high rate because it's not like a lot of people are moving to this place. So they were 24% voluntary turnover, and they started using this like opt-in group coaching, and it was all about kind of respecting other people and understanding like the value that a different person brings, a different perspective brings. And ultimately, he doesn't use the term, but it's ultimately psychological safety, which is what Google came up with in 2015, saying that their most productive teams have a high degree of psychological safety. So they had this thing, it was like opt-in, it was like company-wide, the CEO would go, no one was forced to do it. But every year, once they started, their employee turnover went down 1 to 2% a year. And finally, after 9 years, it got to 4% employee turnover, which is very, very, very low. And it's basically like zero. And then as soon as that happened, right, people are just calling their neighbors or their sisters or whoever, like you don't even have to pay recruiters, right? Because everyone knows that no one leaves because it's so good there. And then what was cool is that the CEO quantified the difference between 24% turnover and 4% turnover, and that was $32 million a year.
Just a tiny little drop in the bucket, right?
Crazy about that is, and that might not be relevant for tech, because one of the things that goes on in healthcare is that they have traveling nurses, which are like 1.5 or 2 times the rate of a regular nurse because you're plugging a hole. But you can see how that becomes a downward spiral where you can't fill the jobs, but you need to fill a hole. So you're paying people too much, and then you have less cash. And so what I always say about that case study, bring it up, is because you can really go from playing defense to playing offense. Because if you now have $32 million a year, what do you want to do with that? Do you want to build new buildings? Do you want to give people raises? Do you want to give people bonuses? What, you choose. And
pay the nurses more.
Yeah. And then, by the way, they're winning awards. So everyone wants to work at that hospital. Like, it's really easy to recruit. And like, you don't really, and like, the other joke is like, I can guarantee you they're spending less than $1 million on that coaching system, right? So the ROI is very high, and there's really no downside to investing in human capital. And I just think that it's very rare for people to actually quantify this kind of stuff. But when you do, you see that it's a huge home run.
So I want to just ask a quick left turn question here, just quickly for both of you. Hey, we haven't talked about it. Is it something where we have to pay? We just assume we have to pay above market average, or can we play market average and just have a great culture? I mean, Stephanie, what do you think?
I'd say yes.
Yes.
Market
Francie,
average pay. Okay. Yeah. Listen, I'll tell you, like 100%. I was thinking back on like this conversation as a young person, and thinking, if I got paid just average, but I was like thrilled with my job, and I was getting super cool opportunities, and I was learning all the time, you couldn't tear me away from that place, because I'd be like rocking and rolling. I'm so happy. I probably have things in the pipeline for years. Like, I want to see how it turns out. I want to make sure I'm able to like do this thing. I actually think, yeah, you could probably pay actually like below average, but I think you don't want to be that place. But I think if you pay like fairly and you treat people really well and you give them a lot of opportunity, that is a recipe for success.
There's a little bit of nuance in there too. I work in the tech industry, and I work with public sector organizations, which are all unionized, right? And by way of the union, they limit how many positions you can put into any department at a certain pay grade. And so what ends up happening is this organization can only ever hire, um, you know, technical resources at way under market rates, because the union doesn't understand, and respect sort of the competitive. So they'll never, ever, ever be able to get the senior level technical resources that they really actually desperately need, even for short periods of time, because they're trying to pay an architect $100 an hour when you wouldn't even pay a junior $100 an hour. So there's a little bit of that going on too. One of the things I just wanted to also bring up, Francie, is we're talking to founders, and usually early stage founders on this show. I don't want to wait until I have high turnover to start doing something about it. So what are the early indicators that it might be something I need to address?
Yeah, well, I mean, one thing, I think the easiest way to start, and that's really inexpensive if you have a small company, is just to start surveying people in like anonymous ways, just to understand how people think, or even like people love to be asked their opinion. And then, by the way, and then they also love to have their opinion like make an impact or like do something. So for instance, I was on a call where the discussion was what are some benefits you can give to like the lowest level employees? And I was sitting there thinking, why don't you ask them? Like instead of like, everyone sitting around a table and like kind of come up with really good ideas, like why don't you say, hey, listen, these are 5 ideas we came up with that might be really interesting benefit for you guys. Like, what do you think about those? Are there others you have in mind? I mean, that makes people so excited because they can really give an opinion. Maybe they get what they want, maybe they don't, but then you're listening to them and they're changing their lives, right? They're changing their position in that organization. And like, that's the kind of stuff that you can go, it's very inexpensive and you can do it from day one.
Go ahead, Stephanie, please.
No, you can.
No. All right. So it's fascinating. And this is I'm stepping out of like actually asking questions just because you've hit on so many just incredibly important points, I think. So one, you talked about Project Aristotle, largest project of high-performing teams ever recorded, only something that Google could do, list of things, but number one was psychological safety. The work of Carol Dweck, anything that she's done is fantastic. She actually used healthcare as her primary place where she studied, and she found that high-performing teams actually reported errors higher than low-performing teams, which is a little terrifying.
Because they reported them.
Because they reported, because they felt psychologically safe. And the other one is Adam Grant did a terrific work on what makes employee satisfaction and meaning in everyday work, that meaning, that why, finding their why in that work is critically important. But you hit on it too, Stephanie, which is this idea of autonomy and the ability to control their day. We as adults want to have a sense of control over our environments and how we spend our time, et cetera. And I wanted to bring that up, Francie, because that's not, founders sometimes are crappy managers. We're so driven, we're so outcome based that we sometimes forget these very basic stuff. So if I'm an early stage founder and I'm kind of missing on this stuff, how would you coach me to think through some of the stuff we just talked about?
Well, first of all, one thing I would say is don't overthink it. You don't need to, micromanage people. Just tell them the goal, right? Because like as the founder, you're sort of the ultimate decision maker. But I think you can always say, listen, like, here's what I'm trying to do. Can you come up with some ideas? I mean, that is a great thing as an employee. The worst thing as an employee is when someone's like, I want this to happen, then you do X, then you do Y, then you do that. And like, that's annoying as an employee because you don't have any autonomy. You have no ability to be creative and come up with a different solution. And I think as a founder, like, you're not, omniscient, right? You don't know all the things that can happen when someone devotes all of their time to this one project. Like, let them start to figure out some things. You can always tell them to go back and change it if you don't like what's happened. But I do think the ability to let in like new feedback or new interesting things happen, like giving people space for that to happen, like incredible things could happen. I mean, you could also have an employee who's like a disaster and that doesn't go so well. So maybe, again, like that, I'm not going to say that every employee is like, does a great job with instruction, but I think that like letting people be creative with tasks is an incredible way to lighten the load of a founder and then make the employee happy.
Got to go to speed round, but Stephanie, I want to give it to you. Just any examples and then any last questions.
Yeah, the last comment I was just going to say is like, I think the .com days were a perfect example of this because we didn't have time to micromanage anybody. And so people were coming in, I was like 27 and my job was to incubate companies. Incubate little businesses. Like everybody in the organization was just given ownership and responsibility and to go and like pushed. And I'll say I had to lay someone off when all the funding started to go down, and he bought me flowers. He said it was one of the best places I've ever worked because all of the ownership and the independence and all of that sort of thing.
I was going to say is one of the best layoffs he's ever had. Like one of the top 10 firings that ever happened. Just one other thing. I'm wearing my Bunker Labs shirt. Bunker Labs was a national veteran nonprofit that served veteran entrepreneurs. But incredible organization, but they were all veterans. And one of the things that they deployed, which I really liked, I'm not a veteran, I didn't serve, but they used a concept called commander's intent, which came out of the military, which is they recognize the fact that when you start moving, there's going to be things that come up and you're not going to be able to know and understand. And you as the commander, you don't really understand that. But if you say very clearly, my intent is you go do this thing, and how you do that is up to you. It was a really powerful tool in a nonprofit, but it worked incredibly well.
Yeah, I think I have the book that came from.
Or is this from Todd, right? Todd
Is it this? So this is like my all-time favorite book.
Oh yeah, it's one of the that's a great book. Yeah.
And it's all about like a naval submarine that was a nuclear naval submarine. And he basically was like, let's talk about intent, because as a submarine captain, you had to approve like all the pins and I don't know, all the different random things on the ship. And so finally he's like, this is unsustainable. I can't be the one decider on this. So he basically rejiggered the whole thing so that every single person who had a responsibility would pitch him basically like, here's what I'm going to do. I want to do this, what do you think? And he would say yes or no or ask questions. But it completely changed the whole culture of the ship. And it ended up becoming like the top performing naval submarine in the fleet.
That's an incredible story. I love it. All right. Are you ready, Francie, for the speed? Oh, no. Our very dramatic graphic.
I love that.
Series of questions, just answer quickly. Preventions or intervention, which saves more money when talent starts eyeing the exit?
Oh, I would say prevention. I think organized policies.
Like an individual coaching or team-wide cultural change, which moves the needle for retention faster?
Team.
Higher pay or higher purpose, which keeps top performers longer?
Higher purpose.
Transparent feedback or diplomatic management, which builds more loyalty with higher achievers?
Oh, that's a good one. I don't have a strong opinion on those, but I do think like the most valuable feedback is honesty. But I think for some people, it's really helpful to be kind, and other people don't get as flustered if it's not super kind. So I don't know. I don't have a strong opinion on that one.
Immediate promotion or long-term development path, which satisfies ambitious employees better?
Well, I think if you're ambitious, you want to get promoted every month. But I think a lot of that has to do with communication. So I would just say, I guess it depends on what you're telling them and how you're setting up their expectations.
I love it. Terrific conversation. I had a ton of fun. This is like Steffi and my geek out, like psychology place for management and leadership. I love this stuff. Stephanie, what'd you learn today?
All right. One of the takeaways for me was that the biggest misconception is that there is no cost to employee turnover, and in fact, we have learned that that is quite untrue, and it can actually be quite the opposite. It can be a real profit to the organization. Focusing on growing people and developing and retaining an alumni base, whereas we're not trying to get 100% retention. That's just not realistic, but it's also not desirable either. So recognizing that there's always going to be sort of a stratification. Hiring on mindset versus technical aptitude. This has always been the case, with some exceptions. But I think that's an important thing to remember. Having a strong North Star and a strong purpose is probably one of the most important things that any sort of organization can have, whether you're 2 people or 2,000. And then the importance of psychological safety. This is so under studied and we just don't talk about it enough. And psychological safety is it's trust. It's knowing that I'm protected. It's knowing that I'm valued. And then finally, retention doesn't require you to pay above average rates in order to keep people. You can still operate at a market ready salary range and retain all of those really great people, because they're not necessarily there for the money, right?
Yeah.
Well said. Deep dive recommendations. There's a ton of them. I'll just start off by saying, look for Project Aristotle. It's actually kind of hard to find the data now. There's some like Google Japan, I think, now owns the site, but you can find the findings. Like, you can locate those findings online. Really, really powerful study. The Culture Engine by Chris Edmonds. Have not read that one. Classic book, The Hard Thing About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz. Talks about a lot about this stuff about growing a company. There's a terrific episode with Patty McCord of the Tim Ferriss Show, who was the former Netflix chief people officer. So the Tim Ferriss episode, look at that. And there's an article called The Real Reason People Quit Their Jobs by Harvard Business Review. Francie, terrific conversation. Thank you for being patient as I screwed up yet again. Stephanie, I'm going to make it 3 for 3 on Thursday. Where can we find more about you?
Yeah. So terawatt.co, no M, is our website. And we have a get in touch page. So if there's anyone who wants to set up a call with me, that's a great way to do it. And then social media wise, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, as is Terawatt. And that's where we sort of share ideas and stuff. But I'm always interested in connecting with people. So feel free to reach out wherever it makes sense.
I love it. And, Stephanie, you're sitting in for Anthony. I mean, you're way smarter than Anthony and I. Where can we connect with you?
Yeah, I am.
Yeah, you didn't pause when I said that. You didn't think it was a joke. You just said, yes, that's true.
No, it's accurate. But speaking of employee retention, you guys are on notice, I think.
No, I think so as well. Yeah, I think which one's going to get fired, Anthony or both. Who's going to take over both? Yeah, exactly. That's terrific. I know we have something coming up. Stephanie, do you know what we have on Thursday?
We have another episode on Thursday coming up, and that is all about building mental models with our guest, Eric Archer.
That's going to be another one you and I can geek out about. I think it's going to be terrific. Yeah, it's going to be really fun. Francie, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it. Stephanie, thank you for sitting in and inevitably firing both Anthony and I. I think it's just a matter of time at this point. And go to howtofounder.com. Rank us. If you like Stephanie, don't judge us just on Anthony and I. Stephanie's way cooler. So ranks, give us some stars for Stephanie.
Better dad jokes.
Yeah, better dad jokes. All right. We'll see you next time, everybody.